It's time for an overhaul. Check this out. Welcome back and thanks for being here. My name is Scott, and in a previous video I told you that I was going to overhaul my trunk area, my electronics, to make room for more. It never stops. My plan right now is to empty the car out. I will share that with you. Then I need to make the car electrically safe, and then I will start removing equipment until this thing is stripped down. And while I have the back stripped out, I need to replace my trailer lighting control module. I've been waiting a long time to do that because unfortunately I buried my module someplace where I can't get to it unless everything is out. So now is a great time to replace that module. It is noisy out. I hear leaf blowers, jet noise, leaves on the ground. And so a lot of what you are about to hear will be me doing a voiceover. I just wanted to kick off the video in person, and then I'll move on with voiceover after this. All right, stand by, here we go. Before I start, let me give you a quick overview of what I'm removing. If you're familiar with my car, then you've probably already seen this before. You can see the 12-volt distribution section, the transceivers, and then a section for audio, and then the subwoofer is right in the middle. I'll remind you that this project is happening in 3 phases. Phase 1 was to remove the subwoofer and relocate it to elsewhere in the car. That's done, but I didn't do it quite like that, not as I planned. This video here is going to share Phase 2, which was the bulk of the overhaul. All right, it's time to get to work, and now that the car is electrically safe, I'll share this whole thing at high speed to reduce your boredom. I started by removing everything that connects the panel to the car. And so when I first designed this panel, I did it so that I could remove the panel without removing too much wiring. So I use a lot of quick connects, and if there's in a few cases some nuts to remove from the main power relay. Later I made some exceptions and used full-length cables when I installed new equipment, and of course that made removing the panel a little bit more complicated because then I had to cut zip ties and remove cable before I could get the panel out. Once everything was disconnected, I was free to lift the electronics panel up and out of the car after finding a few more things that I had missed. I set the panel on a pair of sawhorses and then removed the spare tire. Having the trunk emptied presented a great time to replace my glitchy trailer lighting control module. Everything for the trailer lighting is buried behind the interior, both carpet and plastic panels, and so there's no better time to do this work than right now while there's no panel in my way. The new module has connectors that allow me to plug directly into the factory tail lighting, and I find it difficult to unplug these lights unless I remove the light housings. So while the lights were out, I took the time to clean a lot of debris from behind the lights. If you're familiar with the Golfs anyway, a lot of water and therefore debris runs down through the channels of the trunk lid, and then it collects behind the tail light. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, remove your tail lights and you'll see there's a lot of stuff back there. If you have water intrusion in your trunk, odds are very good that you need to clean or perhaps replace the gaskets on your tail lights because they will let water through once they wear out. I reinstalled the lights once I had fished the wiring under the trim and behind the carpet. So here's a look at the new controller. And here is the driver's side lighting connection. You can hardly tell that there's a change. The module basically takes inputs from the lighting harness at the light and then switches it to its own 12-volt path. And so that way there's no balloon fuses, and then it takes that and sends it straight to a 4-pin trailer connector. And this connector is designed to be outside, but I plug my controller into an extension and then I run the extension through the floor. That way, if anything happens to the trailer connection, I only need to replace an extension instead of rewiring a new connector or maybe even replacing the whole control module. Here is where I mounted the new control module. With that task out of the way, it was time to cut some wood. Well, MDF actually. I made my panel from 3/4 inch MDF, and I've been asked to provide a template of my panel several times over the years. Well, guess what? Everyone already has a template right here. I traced around the factory floor and then started cutting. What you're seeing here is me cutting some relief cuts, and then I used a can of compressed air to blow my work surface clean as I ran the saw so that I could see my line. You can see that I added cutouts and a hinged piece to mimic the stock floor. I didn't hinge the original panel, which was good for keeping it in place, but made accessing the spare tire much more difficult. This hinge will allow me to access the spare tire well and anything in there very easily. Here is my first test fit of the panel, which wasn't terribly beneficial since I had not yet reinstalled the rear trim panels. Instead, I decided to add sound deadening material to the trunk floor and rear wall of the trunk. I did not deaden the entire trunk, only what you can see right here. And there's already deadening material over the rear seat tubs. The reduction in exhaust sound is more subtle than profound. I need to deaden the hatch to make more of a difference on the exhaust sound. The next day, it was time to remove my hidden FT857D body to make room for the 12-volt distribution system, its new home for it. And even more important than that was the task of untangling all of the wires that had become a mess over the years of adding new equipment. This was a very tedious process that took about 4 days, believe it or not. Some of the wires were unlabeled, so there was a bit of a treasure hunt to untangle them, trace them out, label them with a colored tag, and then get them out of the car so that I could regroup them with cables that were assigned to the same transceiver. And by get them out of the car, what I was actually doing was stringing them out of the door and into the yard for untangling. Here I'm doing another test fit of the panel and testing the hinge movement. I did more trimming on the panel's sides because I wanted the panel to be able to raise to near vertical. Next, I measured several times, measure, remeasure again, and then marked the position on my spare tire's hold down bolt, and then I cut a hole with a hole saw. I notched the hinged piece to make room for some cables to enter the trunk without being pinched under the panel, and I will eventually cut more channels into this piece in the future. Here is the last test fit and fastening with the spare tire nut. The fit and hold down is perfect. Next, I removed the 12-volt distribution components from the old panel so that I could move them to the rear seat delete. I had a general idea of where I wanted the parts to go. The main relay had to go where my existing 4-gauge wire would reach, and then I positioned everything else from there. Suddenly, I got an idea of where to hide some of my coaxial feedline stuff. I decided to draw lines on the panel to represent the spare tire well and the spare tire itself. The space left in between these lines represents a channel in which I can tuck cables, diplexers, and coaxial switches, and I'll share more about that in Phase 3. I continued by removing the other equipment that's moving to the new panel. Once the main parts were removed, I was then able to position each transceiver on the new panel, with my goal being to find locations for each part that would put its RF connections as close as possible to the channel beneath the board. I used a tape line to represent where future amplifiers would reside, sort of a do not cross line. Then I started working to get everything near the channel. I marked the points where I expected to pass coaxial cables and then cut some holes. Now let me say that I am no master craftsman. Woodworkers will notice right away that I'm not using the best tools or techniques for this job, and those without woodworking tools should notice that I am using very basic power tools. So you can do this as well with basic power tools. Anyway, after cutting the holes, I taped off the area and then painted inside the holes for cosmetic effect. I got back to work on the new 12-volt distribution panel between paint coats in the backyard. Notice that I still have quite a mess of cables in the rear seat delete. Believe it or not, these cables are about 70% untangled and bundled into appropriate groups. This cold nighttime session was when I got to sort more wire bundles and figure out where I wanted to route each one. For example, each transceiver has a power feed, which is positive and negative, 1 or 2 coaxial connectors, and then connections for the remote microphone, display, speaker, and data. So basically 6 wires or cables for each transceiver. That is 200 feet of cable for the radios alone, and that doesn't even include the coaxial feed line. So that's a lot of untangling. Back to the panel, I attempted to carpet the panel, but I did everything wrong. It was cold outside, which is not ideal for the glue. I bought thin carpet from Amazon. I didn't realize it until I received it and tried to put it on, and then I didn't apply the glue correctly. So the carpet didn't stick to the board. In the end, I peeled the carpet off, sanded the panel smooth, and then took it to the pros at Hampton Roads Customs. They did a great job while I waited, used better glue, and their years of experience. The glue was dry before I even left the store. As a result, I was able to get straight to work mounting equipment as soon as I got home. Again, I used a tape line to align everything. The radios' close proximity to one another made for cramped working, but I got the transceivers and fuse block mounted in the dark. I saved mounting the voltage regulator and the ground bar for the next day. Next came the tedious task of wiring everything. And this isn't difficult work, it's just slow going and very tedious. At this point in the video, I had been working on the project for 6 days. I had been off air the whole time. I needed at least one radio to work so that I could function as a net control station the following day. I managed to wire the ID5100 and then quit for the night. This is more of the tedious wire work, cutting everything to fairly precise lengths so that I could route everything in an orderly fashion and then crimp on a terminal ring. Some have noticed 2 things. First, the voltage regulator's negative lead going to the ground bar has red on it. And yes, that is a distraction. I'll probably cover it in black heat shrink to hide the very annoying red stripe which came from the red positive lead when I pulled the wires apart. The next thing some have noticed is that the fuse block has both red and black wires going to it, and that's because I split it in half so that I could fuse both the positive and negative leads. The installation instructions for all of these transceivers call for fuses on both positive and negative leads. They also call for the wires to run all the way to the starter battery. And to that I say no thanks. I have them fused very close to the voltage regulator, and the voltage regulator is fused at the lithium secondary battery. So that leaves me very confident in the safety behind how I've designed everything. More wire work and then fastening the bundles to the panel to finish this part. You can see the fronts of each transceiver from this view. Only the ID5100 has its cables connected at this point, so I have a long way to go still. The next day, I cleaned up the spare tire well to address phase 1. I had experimented with my 10-inch subwoofer in the interior of the car, but I didn't like the loss of interior space, so I did the unimaginable. I removed the 10-inch subwoofer and returned the Helix subwoofer to the car. An honest assessment of my listening habits made me realize that the Helix subwoofer is more than enough for my usual listening volumes. Occasionally I miss being able to let the bass really thump, but most of the time I'm fine. And yes, I gave up the spare tire, but I haven't needed a spare tire in a very long time, especially now that I travel with a tire plugging kit. Jinx! I do put the spare tire in the trunk or trailer when I travel outside of my local area. Otherwise, I'm just going to call a tow truck and get a ride to a discount tire. Next, it was time to make some data connections and get the other radios powered. You can see that I'm still not quite done hiding cables, but I'm getting there. I know it looks pretty awful, but this really is coming together. At this point, I'm rerouting wire bundles so that I can lay them in logical order so that I can minimize crossovers and tangling. Eventually, all of this will be tied and concealed under the carpet. All right, this sequence is getting longer than I remember, so let's jump to right here. Now it's time to route the coaxial feed lines. So I started by cutting holes in the carpet so that I could access the holes that I had put in the panel, and then I routed the feed lines through. Once under the panel, I connected the diplexers and antennas. I have 9 antennas and plans for 4 more. I don't quite have everything that I need, so this is all very temporary. And basically what you see here is serving to show me what I need to order. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to order some longer cables, and I'm going to use LMR 240 Ultra Flex so that I can then fasten the diplexers to the spare tire well instead of letting them hang like what you see here. I have 2 remote RF switches to add as well. Here is the electronics panel as I finish phase 2 of the overhaul. And this isn't the end state, but it gets all of the transceivers on the air with the exception of the GMRS radio. I'll connect the GMRS radio when I acquire the LMR 240. Here's the rear seat delete on the driver's side, and I've mounted the 12-volt distribution under the door. So I have the main feed coming in from the starter battery. It goes to this 12-volt relay, which is the main power relay. I will eventually put a plastic cover over top of this to protect the exposed 12 volts. From the relay it goes to this fuse block, and the fuse block then reroutes power to my DC to DC charger, the trailer lighting control module, and an alternate path for the lithium battery's heater. This fuse block is only energized when the engine is running. When it's parked, only this point here has 12 volts, unless I have a charger plugged into this auxiliary charging connection. I also mounted my WeBoost cellular signal booster here. The rear seat tub looks fairly good, cleaned up pretty well. I still need to connect the ventilation, which is not a huge priority until next spring. I'll probably do it during phase 3. Phase 3 will include the addition of RF amplifiers in this blank space here on the electronics panel, and Yagi directional antennas for the roof. That will be for contests only. All right, let me know what you think of all of this, and feel free to ask questions. As always, I'm glad to answer, and I really appreciate you being here. I'll see you next time. Take care.